The Slaves to Darkness are the greatest and largest army of Chaos Warriors in the mortal realms. Headed by many vicious warlords, they seek to bring ruination to the realms of Sigmar and all who stand in their way. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to the Slaves to Darkness Army Overview, where we'll be covering their army abilities, battle formations, artifacts, and heroic traits. As the Slaves to Darkness are a personal favorite faction of mine, I really am looking forward to this. So, the Slaves to Darkness have two main battle traits, that being Eye of the Gods and the Mark of Chaos. We'll start with the Mark of Chaos, as this is a little simpler. When assembling your army, each of your Slaves to Darkness units gain a Mark of Chaos and the associated ability. If they follow Chaos Undivided, they add 1 to wound rolls made against hero or monster units, very solid for helping them punch up against big things, especially those that rely on their saves for toughness. Khorne, you add 1 to the attack's characteristics for melee weapons if they charge, perhaps the most generally useful one, as this is a mainly melee army that really appreciates getting those extra attacks on usually quite high quality attacks. Then, Tzeentch is slightly more niche. This unit has Ward 4+ against damage from spells and abilities used by manifestations. This does make them extremely resilient to magic damage of all kinds, though of course will be useless against some matchups. Though of course it isn't necessarily a bad thing, as if someone is relying on a manifestation or spell to get to your back line, this could be great for camping an objective. Then Nurgle is my second favorite. It's subtract 1 from wound rolls for combat attacks that target that unit. Extremely useful to make the already durable and heavily armored, that's what I call them, Space Marines, Chaos Warriors significantly tougher. Very useful for any grunts doing manual labor like taking objectives. Then Slaanesh is also very useful, where you add 1 to run rolls and charge rolls for this unit, just to make a unit overall faster, and has some great synergy with a spell we'll see later. Then onto Eye of the Gods, sort of their main in-game ability. Mark of Chaos is passive, and Eye of the Gods is activated at the end of each turn, presuming there are targets for it. And the targets for that would be any non-beast, or non-hero beast, or monster, and any other Slaves to Darkness units that destroyed a unit. So long as they aren't a beast, they can get affected by this, effectively. Roll a d6 and apply the effects below. You can reroll the result, but if you roll a 1 on the reroll, you suffer d3 mortal wounds. These effects can stack and can be rolled multiple times. Snubbed by the Gods is no effect, it only occurs on a 1. On a 2, you get Mutative Regrowth, which is heal 3 the target. More useful, though also more useful for only certain things, as this won't help things like Dark Oath that much. Unnatural Grace, you add 1 to hit rolls for combat attacks for the rest of the battle. This is super useful, as most of the Chaos Warriors already hit on 3s, so hitting on 2s is just a nice solid buff. Then Lurid Aura happens on a 4, the target gains Ward 6+, if they already had it they gain Ward 5+, perhaps the most useful one to get a bonus on. This is of course very useful for durability, just doubling down on the already tough Chaos Warriors. Then Slaughterer's Might happens on a 5, you add 1 to Rend for melee weapons for the rest of the battle, also very good to get doubles of, especially on characters, as they tend to only be Rend 1 in this book, or on Chosen, who are also puzzlingly Rend 1. Then Champion of Chaos happens on a 6, where you pick any of the effects. Of course, this is extremely useful, and in terms of when to reroll, I'd really only ever reroll a 1, or maybe a 2 depending on the situation, just because there is that risk of d3 mortal wounds, though you are very likely to get a solid buff no matter what happens, and the reroll of course isn't the most devastating, as d3 mortal wounds is not necessarily the most game-changing amount of damage. However, just don't reroll it every time, just reroll it if you get a 2 if it's useless, or a 1 if you only roll a 1. In terms of Marks of Chaos, I would currently rank Khorne, Nurgle, and Undivided the best, with Slaanesh just behind and then Tzeentch in last, just because Tzeentch is so matchup specific. On to their battle formations, which you would select at the army construction step. There are 4 of them to choose from, which is quite fun at least. Then we'll start with the Legion of Chaos, the sort of generic soup list, if you will. Soup's not the right word, but combined arms. Well, there's at least 1 friendly warrior of Chaos hero, so that would be Chaos Lords, Chaos Lords on demonic mounts, and so on. And 1 other friendly demon hero or Dark Oath hero. Add 2 to the control scrolls of friendly Slaves to Darkness units while they contest objectives outside friendly territory. Generally helpful for winning the objective games, which is very important in Age of Sigmar, as it is in most games, and is of course a generalist and very useful thing to have, though can be sniped out unfortunately if your demon or your Warrior of Chaos hero dies. I'm not the biggest fan of Dark Oath units, but you could also use that to do that. However, I think the point still stands. You are susceptible to being sniped out and then losing your battle formation ability. And while this is good for helping contest objectives, there is one that's much better, the God's Wrath Warband. At the end of the turn, turn, pick an objective contested by any friendly units to be the target. Place a defiled token next to the objective, then roll a d3 for each enemy on any defiled objective. On a 2+, they suffer mortal wounds equal to the roll. This is generally very useful to make the objective game surprisingly dangerous for the enemy. If you can get just a few units, maybe chariots or something similar, into the midfield to defile as many objectives as possible as fast as possible, it will start to whittle down units that like to stand on them. This is more efficient against things that are small in number, like elite armies, compared to things like hordes, where there will often be just enough hordes to take the damage. Then we have Despoilers, which I think is by far the weakest. This, you have to have a Demon Prince in your army to use this. You pick a friendly non-hero Slaves to Darkness beast or monster that hasn't fought wholly within 12 inches of this unit. That target can be picked to use a fight immediately after this fight ability has been used by the Demon Prince. This allows you to have uninterruptible combat with the Demon Prince and a beast companion. However, most of the beasts in this codex is the right word, in this faction pack are not particularly interesting. Even the Slaughter Brute kind of suffers from 4-2+ syndrome, where its attacks hit on 4s but wound on 2s, which isn't very helpful. And then things like the also, they're all companion weapons, so they can't get buffed. Or things like the Mutilated Vortex Beasts have good durability but very mediocre damage output. You could use this with something like, per se, a Soul Grinder, I believe. However, I think this is sort of pointless unless you're going very heavily on Demon Princes and monsters. Then Dark Oath Horde is, of course, for the Dark Oath players out there who like to run lots of more squishy but more numerous Chaos Slaves to Darkness, if you will. If there's a friendly Dark Oath hero on the battlefield, pick a friendly non-unique or hero-destroyed unit, that is, of course, Dark Oath only, then roll a dice. On a 3+, set up a replacement unit with half the number of models rounding upward, wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield edge and further than 3 inches from enemies. This, of course, happens in your at the end of the turn, and in general is a solid enough way to keep these relatively squishy models on the board, though it does force you to run a lot of regiments, as you don't really want to be bringing auxiliary heroes to cover most of the board. Now, it is, not necessarily a small aura, but it's not huge either, so you definitely will want a healthy dosage of your Dark Oath War Queens and War Chieftains to keep the Dark Oath units coming. Though this does, of course, have diminishing returns, as each time the unit comes back it is halved, which does encourage reinforcement, I will add, which I do like. Out of all of these, I'd say Legion of Chaos and God's Wrath Warband are really the two best ones, and God's Wrath is easily better than Legion of Chaos. Though Dark Oath is, of course, good if you're running a lot of Dark Oath. I think Despoiler is completely pointless. So if you're bringing a normal army, God's Wrath. If you're bringing lots of Dark Oath, bring Dark Oath. Then, in terms of heroic traits, you get one of these in your army, remember that. You have Favorite of the Pantheon, Deathmonger, or Radiance of Dark Glory. All three of these have some interesting abilities, though I do believe that the first two are the best. Favorite of the Pantheon is activated in your deployment phase after you deploy the hero with it. You get to use the Eye of the Gods ability as if it were the end of the turn, and they destroyed an enemy unit. This simply allows you to get a head start, which can allow the Chaos units to snowball very efficiently, and is of course good for characters just to give them that extra oomph of power, given the fact they often have lower amounts of attacks. This is of course my favorite, though Deathmonger is a close second. It's very simple. You gain a once per battle ability to fight twice, though the second fight ability has Strike Last. After the first has been used. This is of course super useful just to eke out extra damage from a Chaos Lord, and is of course just a powerful thing to have in general, though it does have some slight anti-synergy with their own abilities, where they often allow an uninterrupted combat between them and then their chosen retinue. Then Radiance of Dark Glory is the last of the three heroic traits, and it's perhaps the most interesting, if not the most powerful. Pick each damage-friendly unit within 12 inches of this model, roll a d6, on a 3+, heal 1 that unit. If that unit is a monster, heal 3 that target. This is, of course, a solid enough aura of healing, though I'd say it really only has one major application I can think of where it won't be sort of sock-fisted, if you will. It's if you're running Mutilated Vortex Beasts, you could in theory bring 3 of them and then a hero with this ability, which can then cover all 3 of them, which means they'll all be recovering, D3 plus 3 health every turn, which could just be too tough for a lot of armies to kill, and could be useful for taking objectives. Though that is probably more of a gimmick, and is something that is really not super duper competitive, but it certainly would be fun to have a bunch of Undying Tentacle Mouth Bear monsters. Of course, from the heroic traits, we move on to the Infernal Treasures, or effectively what would be considered relics if you wish. There's 3 of them, and I'd say this is perhaps the single weakest part of the Slaves to Darkness army pack. The Infernal Puppet is a once per battle ability, start of any turn, declare an enemy wizard visible within 24 inches of this model. Each time that wizard uses a spell ability, inflict d3 mortal damage as a reaction. If the target is destroyed by this, do not resolve the spell effects. This is fine enough anti-wizard ability, however given it's only once per battle, it's a pretty simple roundabout way of just shutting off a wizard for that turn, but even then, if the wizard is not damaged, there's a solid enough chance that it could have enough health to simply tank the damage and then resolve its magic anyways. If you want to interfere with magic, I'd recommend bringing a wizard of your own to have a chance to unbind. Though this is guaranteed and could have some use against squishies, maybe elves or similar sort of lower health wizards, that would be at risk of being sniped out by this. Overall, fairly weak. Though it is certainly better than Conqueror's Crown, in my opinion. Conqueror's Crown subtracts 5 from control scores of enemy infantry units while they are in combat with this unit. This is fairly whatever, in my opinion. Most heroes will be accompanied by a retinue of a similar unit, which will often have a solid amount of OC, and subtracting 5 isn't the most impactful when you're likely, if you're making the combat, you will be destroying enough of their enemy models to sort of render that pointless. This would have use against things like Gargants, but this only affects infantry. Conqueror's Crown is really, really not good. And then for a fun and somewhat interesting final act of this, we have the Realm Warper's Twist Rune, which is not it's not standard. Once per battle in the hero phase, select one terrain feature within 12 of this unit. That target gains the obscuring keyword if it didn't have it until the next turn. Then roll a dice for each model, friendly and enemy, within 1 inch of that terrain, and then for each 5+ inflict 1 mortal damage on the unit. This is useful for just kind of setting up obscuring terrain and maybe clearing out a bit of a horde, though I'd leave this one at home. Then, the spell lore is pretty solid in my opinion. We have 3 spells: Spiked Tongue Curse, Binding Damnation, and Demonic Speed. Spiked Tongue Curse is charge 5, so very easy to cast. Pick a wizard to cast the spell, roll the cast. If the cast fails or is unbound, inflict d3 mortal damage on the caster. If it is successful, however, inflict 3 mortal damage on the target. This is solid flat damage, and is useful against anything, and is nice to have in the back pocket when there's no other targets for these spells. Then we have Binding Damnation. Select the wizard to cast, and then an enemy within 12 inches. If successful, the target has strike last for the rest of the turn. This is super useful to synergize with any sort of enemies coming out of, say, the Silver Tower from the Gaunt Summoners, or something similar like that. It's just really useful to shut down a very dangerous melee unit that you can then charge with something like Chaos Knights or Varangard to then destroy them before they even have a chance to make impact. Then, arguably the strongest spell, in my opinion, is Demonic Speed, which is charge 7, same as the last, which is a little harder to do, but not necessarily out of the question. You pick a friendly model within 12 inches of the wizard. If the cast is successful, the target adds 1 to the dice they roll to charge to a max of 3. This is huge and greatly increases your average charge distance. Even though you can still only charge 12 inches, you're much more likely to make almost any charge with another dice in the mix. This also pairs really well with Slaanesh, as you would be adding 1 to the result for some extremely consistent charges. I think it would put your average around 10 inches, which means that no one's really safe from you, especially if you're a mounted unit that's quite fast. I like all 3 of these spells, and I think they're actually quite solid the whole way around. Spiked Tongue Curse has flat damage, which is always useful. Then Binding Damnation is useful to, of course, sort of shut down an enemy unit that can't really do much, and it would be very useful on reaction using the counter spell or spell intervention to really, really throw off some, say, Stormcast, the big guys with the hammers. Giving them strike last would be detrimental, of course. And then Demonic Speed is a great buffing piece, and I'm sure you can make some insane combos with Varangard, or something maybe jumping out of the Silver Tower. Anyways, we've covered everything here except for the Manifestation lore, which I will cover in its own video. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to tune in soon when I do my How to Play series, and I will see you all next time.